There's a rhythm the world drums into us before we even know what a rhythm is. The subtle tick of the clock beside our crib, the calendar marked before we can read, the grown-ups whispering about being behind, catching up, staying ahead. The world doesn't rest, not really. It hums with the insistence that motion equals meaning, that to pause is to disappear, and so we learn to chase time before we ever learn to sit in it. You can feel it everywhere, on the street, where no one meets your eyes because their bodies are moving but their minds are always elsewhere. In cafes, where the quiet is fractured by the tapping of keys, the ticking of tasks. Even in nature, we bring our striving, hiking with step counters, meditating with goals, turning every tree into a backdrop for self-improvement. Stillness has become suspicious. If you are not doing something, learning, producing, optimizing, then what are you? I remember once, at an airport gate, watching a woman cry silently as she stared into the middle distance. No one asked if she was okay. Everyone around her was too busy, hunched over laptops, scrolling with thumb flicks that mimic purpose. I watched her tears as if they were falling in slow motion, like some ancient form of grief, not just for whatever she had lost, but for the sheer impossibility of pausing long enough to feel it. The flight was called, and she stood up and vanished into the current. What drives this world that does not rest is not always ambition or even desire. Sometimes it's fear, the quiet dread that if we stop, the truth might catch up to us, that we might hear the hollowness beneath the noise, that we might realize how long we've been spinning just to stay upright. This thirst for motion is not just external, it lives in us. The internal monologue that says, "You haven't done enough today." The clenched jaw, the twitch of guilt when we sit down without something to show for it. Even our leisure is busy. We binge, we scroll, we conquer virtual kingdoms, always reaching for something just beyond. But what if this motion isn't taking us anywhere? There's a phrase in Japanese, karoshi, death by overwork. It sounds dramatic, but the truth is more insidious. Most of us are not dying in headlines. We are dying in increments, in the subtle erosion of aliveness, the dull ache of disconnection, the way our days blur together until we can't remember the last time we were astonished by something small. Once, I stood at the edge of a forest just after it had rained. The leaves were so still it felt like time had taken a breath. I remember the color of the bark, the way the moss held the light, the hush, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something older than sound. I remember thinking, this moment is not asking anything from me. And in that not asking, something softened. But we don't build our lives around such moments. They don't earn praise, they're not measurable. We move too fast to notice them, too fast to let them teach us anything. We chase peace like it's a trophy at the top of some invisible hill, instead of letting it come to us like a warm animal that only appears when we are quiet enough not to scare it away. The mirror, lake of our inner world, that image of undisturbed clarity, has become so stirred up with effort and motion that we've forgotten it was ever there. We mistake the choppy surface for the nature of the lake itself, but it's not. The stillness is still there, waiting beneath the turbulence. We've just forgotten how to let it emerge. There's a kind of collective amnesia at work, a forgetting of slowness, of unproductive time, of the ancient knowledge that not everything sacred announces itself in bold font. We inherited this world that never rests, and so we believe its terms are unchangeable, but they're not. They're choices that have been made and can be unmade, not with rebellion, not with declarations, but with stillness, with choosing to pause in a world that mistakes pause for weakness. And yet, it's hard. It feels almost impossible to stop when the current is so strong. You begin to feel like a contradiction in your own life. Stillness exposes the parts of us that have grown dependent on the noise. the parts that don't know who they are without the next thing. And this is the moment of resistance, when we start to touch the discomfort beneath all our motion. Not yet ready to surrender, but no longer able to lie to ourselves about the cost. You see, a world that never rests does not only exhaust the body, it frays the soul. But here's the quiet miracle. Even in this motion, even in the rush and roar, there are moments when the stillness calls to us. A memory, a sunset, a question that lingers long after the answer has left. These are not accidents, they are invitations. We begin here, not by changing the world, but by recognizing how deeply it has shaped us and how much of ourselves we've surrendered to keep up, to belong, to matter. But what if doing nothing was its own kind of belonging? And yet even as we speak of it, the motion continues. A quiet flickering in the background, tabs refreshing, phones buzzing, the unrelenting murmur of what's next, echoing from the corners of our culture. We've built lives not around being, but around maintaining status, maintaining attention, maintaining the illusion that we are in control. Stillness, in contrast, feels like slipping beneath the surface, like drowning to a mind trained only to swim upstream. But drowning might not be the right metaphor. Maybe it's more like floating, a skill we unlearned when survival became synonymous with struggle. You try to float, and the instinct is to fight the water, to flail. It's only when you surrender, when you let the water carry you, that the body lifts and the breath expands. There's peace in that, but it's a peace you can't earn. It only comes when you stop trying to deserve it. I once asked an old friend, a musician, what his favorite sound was. He didn't say a chord or a harmony or a bird call. He said, the silence after a bell. That pause, that subtle, shimmering absence, was what moved him most. Not the sound, but the echo of it ending. I think about that often. We live our lives chasing bells, chasing the peak of experience, but we rarely listen to what happens after. We're tone deaf to the sacred hush that follows effort, the place where meaning resounds most fully. In a world that never rests, that hush is treated as a void. But what if it's the most alive part of all? Consider how flowers don't bloom all year, how trees surrender their leaves in gold silence, how the ocean has tides, not just crashing waves, but receding ones. Nature itself, the most ancient teacher, knows when to act and when to wait. It knows the power of dormancy. It does not fear pause. It understands that stillness is not failure. It's part of the rhythm, part of the wholeness. The same wholeness we keep postponing for after the next thing. And maybe that's the real poverty. Not lack of time, but lack of reverence. Reverence for the ordinary, for the in between, for what we miss when we're always racing to the next line on the list. We mistake business for meaning and forget that meaning often arrives like dusk. Slow, unannounced, impossible to hold, but unmistakable when it's there. So we begin to ask quietly, maybe for the first time in a long while, what would it mean to live in a world that rests? Or rather, what would it mean to be someone who rests, even when the world doesn't? The first answer might be uncomfortable, because slowing down means feeling again. It means hearing what the noise has kept at bay: grief, confusion, longing, the ache of not knowing. But it also means hearing the subtle music that only plays in quiet places. The bird outside your window you never noticed. The sound of your own breath when you're not trying to be someone else. The moment your eyes land on something beautiful and you realize you have no desire to post it, prove it, or name it. That's the beginning. Not a dramatic shift, not a declaration, just a noticing. A quiet refusal to rush, a single breath allowed to unfold without agenda. These are small things, but they are not nothing. They are the cracks in the world that never rests, the places where light can get in, and in that light, peace begins to find you, not like a thunderclap, but like a leaf drifting to the ground, quiet, certain. unhurried, somewhere deep inside most of us, buried beneath calendars, deadlines, and the quiet tyranny of self-improvement, lies a question we rarely speak aloud. Have I done enough to deserve rest? It is a question that doesn't knock politely. It hums beneath our thoughts, curls at the edges of sleep, tightens our jaw when we sit still too long. It drives us to open the laptop again, to say yes when we mean no, to push through the H because something in us still believes that rest must be earned through exhaustion. We live, many of us, with an ache to prove, not just to others, though certainly the world trains us early to audition for our own worth, but to ourselves, to prove that we are not lazy, not falling behind, to not wasting our life, to prove we are valid, essential, moving. And in a culture that canonizes productivity, motion becomes its own currency. We perform it. Even when there's nothing left to do, this ache is old. Older than your RA Sum A, older than your inbox, perhaps older than language. It's the ache of the child whose joy was mistaken for idleness, the student praised only for performance, the adult whose quiet was misread as absence. It's the ache of being told, subtly, constantly, that your value lies not in your being, but in your doing, that your stillness must be justified, explained, redeemed. And so we run, not towards something, but away from the shame of stopping, away from the unbearable question, what if I am enough, even when I do nothing at all? Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I visited a monastery in the hills of Kyoto. It was early spring, the trees just beginning to consider blossoming, the air tinged with both chill and the memory of warmth. I had come, I told myself, to study silence, which of course was just another way of dressing up my need to feel useful, even in rest. The monks, I assumed, would be solemn, ascetic, focused. I had imagined a temple of profound effort. But what I found was play. In the mornings, they swept the stone paths slowly, like dancers, no urgency in their limbs. They laughed, not loudly, but with a kind of unguarded delight, and shared bowls of rice with the same reverence you might reserve for ceremony. No one seemed to be proving anything. Not their wisdom, not their enlightenment, not their virtue. They simply were. I remember sitting beside the oldest monk one evening as he watched the wind move through a curtain of bamboo. He said, "Nothing for a long time." Then he turned to me and whispered, "The wind does not ask for applause." That moment, quiet, untheatrical, entirely unnecessary, undid something in me. I had come to that place believing that even peace had to be earned, achieved, performed. But here was a man whose presence carried no striving, whose wisdom did not need an audience. He was not trying to be anything other than what he already was. It was the most unsettling and liberating thing I'd ever seen. The ache to prove is so sneaky because it wears many noble costumes. It shows up as diligence, as ambition, as care. It whispers just a little more, and sometimes, yes, it fuels beautiful things. Books, bridges, revolutions. But it also corrodes. It makes us believe that if we stop, we will vanish, that if we rest, we'll fall behind, that our worth is something fragile we must constantly rebuild, or risk losing altogether. But what if the opposite is true? What if it's in the stillness that we return to ourselves? What if, when we stop proving, we start remembering? Because something strange happens when you let go, even briefly, of the need to be impressive. The world doesn't fall apart. You don't become irrelevant. In fact, things start to reveal themselves. The taste of your tea, the rustle of your neighbor's broom, the pulse of your own heart, steady and unearned. These are the mirrors that remind you are already here, already worthy, already enough. This doesn't mean effort is wrong, but peace arrives not as a reward for effort. It arrives when the effort ends. Not because you've finished everything. You never will. But because you've recognized that the H to prove is not the same as the call to live. To live is to let yourself belong even when you're not performing, to trust that your value is not in question, to know, not intellectually, but viscerally, that the wind, too, needs no justification. So what if we started there, not with a new practice or a better schedule or a quieter desk, but with this one simple, difficult, beautiful thing, letting go of the need to be impressive, letting go of the ache to prove, and listening, instead, for the silence after the bell. There's a phrase I once heard, murmured in the slow breath of a poem. Even the mountain does not announce its strength. And yet, most of us spend our lives announcing ourselves, not always loudly. Sometimes it's the subtle choreography of trying, replying quickly to emails, nodding when we don't agree, polishing our lives into little glass displays of competence and calm. Sometimes it's in the frantic pacing of our own minds, constantly checking, adjusting, calculating how we're being perceived. At its root, the H to prove is not about arrogance. It's about longing, the longing to be safe, to be seen, to matter. Somewhere along the way, many of us began to believe that proving ourselves, endlessly, invisibly, even when no one is watching, was the toll we had to pay for belonging. But this belief turns living into a performance. Even our rest becomes rehearsed, curated moments of wellness, filtered through metrics and mantras, still trying to earn the silence. We carry this need to prove like a stone in our pocket. Its weight so familiar we forget it's not part of our skin, and we mistake the tension it creates for life itself. There's a moment I recall, small, unremarkable on the surface, but it lodged in my chest like a riddle. I was sitting in a park in early autumn, watching a child, maybe 4 years old, chase leaves as they blew across the grass. He wasn't trying to catch them, just following their drift. A leaf would rise, and he'd rise with it. A pause, a turn, another gust, another burst of laughter. No goal, no task, no witness. His mother watched nearby, but she wasn't filming, wasn't clapping, just watching, present. I remember thinking, he's not trying to be anything, he just is. And then the harder question, when did I stop being that way? That moment held up a mirror, not to who I was, but to who I'd learned to be. Someone who had layered effort over everything. Someone who couldn't walk without wondering if they were walking well enough. Someone who mistook being tired for being virtuous. In that child, I saw the paradox of presence, that in doing nothing in particular, he became more fully there than I'd been in days. It made me wonder how often I confuse urgency with importance. How many times I rushed toward a finish line that no one asked me to cross. How much of my life has been built around chasing validation I wouldn't know how to receive, even if it arrived. We're not wrong for wanting to be seen, for wanting to feel like we matter. These are ancient desires, shaped into us before language, held in the bones of ritual and fire. But when we marry that desire to a culture that only rewards motion, we begin to believe that stillness makes us invisible, that to stop is to disappear. But disappearing is not the same as dissolving. Dissolving, in the right light, is a kind of returning. Returning to what is there when nothing is demanded. Returning to the self before the resume, before the timeline, before the voice in our head began whispering, more, better now. Doing nothing in this way is not absence. It is presence without performance. It is existing without explanation. It is the deep, quiet knowing that you already are, even before you prove, produce, or perfect anything. This isn't easy, especially not at first. The ache to prove doesn't dissolve with a single insight. It lingers, it returns, it asks again and again. Are you sure it's safe to stop? But each time we don't answer that voice with action. Each time we let the ache rise without obeying it. We begin to rewrite something, not with willpower, but with trust. Trust that the mirror, lake of our being is still there beneath the churn. Trust that rest will not make us vanish. Trust that who we are is not waiting on the next accomplishment. It is already here, unpolished, undistracted, undone. We don't overcome the ache to prove by defeating it. We let it dissolve in the stillness we were once taught to fear, and in that stillness, something else begins. Something older, something quieter. There is a contract most of us never signed, yet somehow agreed to. Invisible, unwritten, inherited, passed down through stories, schools, glances. It lives in the way we greet each other. How have you been? And we answer reflexively, "Basi," as if business is the currency of legitimacy, as if worth can only be measured in hours spent, tasks completed, results achieved. The contract says produce, and you may belong. Achieve, and you are permitted to rest. Prove your usefulness, or risk being unseen. Most of us obey this contract without question. It's etched not in law but in culture, reinforced by praise and silence alike. We notice it early, in classrooms that reward speed over reflection, in parents who beam more when we win than when we wander, in the slow, quiet dread of being idle, even for an afternoon. And so we internalize the message's stillness is not just strange, it is suspect. The absence of doing begins to feel like the absence of being. But what is this contract really asking of us? And what does it cost? I remember once visiting a friend's grandfather in the countryside, a man who had been a woodworker for 6 decades. His shop was a dim, fragrant space, dust motes catching the golden light like soft confetti. At one point I asked him how long it took to make a chair. He looked at me, amused, and said, "Depends on whether I'm making the chair or whether the chair is making me." I didn't understand then. I do now. What he was pointing to was a different relationship with labor, one where the doing is not driven by urgency or anxiety, but by rhythm, by season, by presence. He worked, yes, but not to prove, not to earn his place in the world. He worked like the tides move, not because they must, but because it is their nature to rise and fall. Compare that to how most of us live, not with rhythm, but with acceleration. We don't pause when the day ends. We just transition into different types of effort. Personal projects, digital scrolling, self-optimization disguised as relaxation. The mind never empties. It just changes gears. We have confused productivity with worth so thoroughly that even our rest must be productive. Meditation apps track our calm. Sleep becomes data. Unplugging is often just strategic retreat before the next push. But there's something heartbreaking about a life that only values what can be counted, because the deepest things, love, attention, awe, peace, are not measurable. They resist quantification. They bloom in the unseen, in the quiet, in the spaces between effort. There's a parable I return to often. A monk is walking through the forest, and he stops to watch a bamboo shoot. For hours he does nothing but sit. A young student finds him and asks, "Why are you just watching?" The monk smiles and replies, "Because I want to witness the moment it becomes real." This moment, this act of doing nothing, of simply witnessing, is a kind of sacred refusal. A refusal to be ruled by the invisible contract. A refusal to measure life only by its outputs. A refusal to collapse our value into our velocity. But such refusals are quiet revolutions, and they are frightening. To break this contract is not merely to stop moving. It is to risk being misunderstood, to let the world call you lazy, or unambitious, or strange, and to let it be wrong about you. To no longer rush to justify your time, your space, your being. And yet, those who step away from the churn often discover something astonishing. That when the noise dies down, when the clock is no longer God, when worth is no longer tethered to work, the self becomes visible again. Not the polished self, not the projected one, but the self that breathes when no one is watching. You begin to notice how rich the silence is, how alive the unproductive moments are, how much of your life was spent reaching towards something that was never gone, only hidden behind the curtain of constant proving. You see the mirror lake again. undisturbed, quiet, whole, and maybe, just maybe, you begin to remember that you were never a machine. You're always a season, a rhythm, not something to be optimized, but something to be witnessed. The invisible contract doesn't come with terms and conditions. It's absorbed, not signed, not enforced by law, but by something far more persuasive, the fear of being seen as idle, unnecessary, or, worst of all, ordinary. We wear the weight of it like a second skin, not always heavy, but ever present. We move not only to accomplish, but to reassure ourselves, I'm still relevant, I'm still needed, I'm still doing enough to matter. But who decides what enough is? Where did the equation first form? That worth equals output, that time is wasted if not filled, that our days must be punctuated with proof. It often starts young, a gold star, a grade, a pat on the head not for curiosity, but for completing something. We learn early to show our work, to perform usefulness, to turn even silence into strategy. The question becomes not, but what will you do with it? And so the contract seeps into everything. Even rest becomes another metric to optimize. We track our steps, our sleep, our breath. We do yoga, but we're not sure why we feel guilty when it doesn't lead to something. Energy, clarity, better posture, better self. Stillness without return begins to feel dangerous, wasteful, like we're falling behind a race we never meant to enter. But here's the quiet harm of it all. When productivity becomes the price of our presence, we no longer know how to just be. I remember a friend once telling me that their biggest fear wasn't death, or failure, or loneliness. It was irrelevance. To be alive and unnoticed, they said, feels like vanishing. That struck me. Because it wasn't fame they were chasing. It was confirmation, a kind of cultural permission to exist. The mirror lake within us, that deep, undisturbed awareness, becomes clouded with this striving. Ripples of comparison, of unspoken rules, of whispered rankings. The stillness isn't gone, but we can't see it anymore, and so we forget it's there. But sometimes, without trying, we remember, not through grand gestures or forced stillness, but through unexpected grace. A woman waiting for a train, watching dust dance in the sunlight. A retiree sitting on a bench, doing nothing but smiling at pigeons. A morning where you wake before the alarm and just stay in bed. Not because you're tired, but because the world hasn't begun shouting yet, and something inside you wants to listen longer. These moments aren't breaks in life, they are life. But the contract tells us otherwise. It whispers that unless we can explain a moment's usefulness, it holds no value. What a tragedy, what a lie. There's a Japanese concept, yutori, that loosely translates to a kind of spaciousness. It's the opposite of cramming. It's the feeling of enough room, enough time, enough breath, not just for tasks, but for grace, for inefficiency, for wandering. For yutori is what we trade away for the illusion of certainty. And it is in that illusion that we lose access to our seasons. Because seasons, by their nature, do not rush. The tree does not panic in winter. It does not strive to bloom faster, nor apologize for stillness. It trusts the rhythm. It knows that the unseen labor, the rooting, the conserving, is not a pause from life. It is life. But we rarely give ourselves that same permission. We fear being labeled dormant, passive, unremarkable. We forget that not everything true is loud, that not all growth is visible, so we keep pushing, keep producing, keep proving, until something breaks. Sometimes it's the body, a diagnosis, a collapse, a sudden inability to wake without dread. Sometimes it's the soul, a sense that your life is full, but you are empty, that your calendar is packed, but your heart is tired of pretending. And sometimes the break is quieter, just a whisper, a pull, a longing. What if there's another way? That question, gentle but insistent, is the first undoing of the contract, not with rebellion, but with remembering. remembering that you were whole before your to-do list, that the sky does not care if you answer every message. That peace is not a product of proving, but the grace that arrives when proving ends. We begin to loosen our grip, not all at once, but moment by moment, choice by quiet choice, and slowly the contract fades, and in its absence something older begins to return. There is a kind of clarity that only arrives when nothing is demanded of us, not because we've earned it or solved some inner riddle, but because we've stopped stirring the water. Imagine, for a moment, a still lake at dawn. The surface smooth as glass. You can see everything. The sky's blush reflected, the trees bending over its edge, the occasional bird gliding past, all held in perfect mirror like calm. But then, a single stone tossed. A ripple forms, not violent, not even disruptive at first, but enough to fracture the reflection, enough to turn what was whole into something uncertain, moving, broken by motion. This is what effort often does to awareness, not just effort of the body, but the subtle effort of striving, fixing, proving, pushing, the effort of always trying to be something rather than simply being. And when that effort becomes constant, even invisible, the mirror lake of the self grows cloudy. We no longer see clearly. Not the world, not others, not even ourselves. We chase clarity through effort. We think, if I just try a little harder, I'll find peace. If I solve the next thing, fix the next flaw, optimize the next moment, maybe then the water will still. But the water only stills when we stop stirring it. And yet, stopping feels dangerous. Because for many of us, effort is identity. We have learned to equate our movement with meaning, our urgency with importance, our tiredness with significance. To surrender effort, even briefly, feels like letting go of who we think we are. But it's worth asking, who are we beneath the motion? There's a story I once heard, told by a woman who had survived a long illness. Not one of those fast, cinematic battles, but a slow erosion, a kind of quiet unraveling of everything she thought she could control. At first, she said, I fought every symptom. Every wave of exhaustion felt like a betrayal I needed to overcome. I was determined to win my stillness back. But eventually, she said, something changed. She began to listen, not to doctors or timelines, but to the rhythms of her own body. She stopped asking when she'd feel like herself again, and started asking, who is this self I've been trying to return to? She told me, it wasn't until I let the struggle go that I started to feel whole, not better, not fixed, but clear, like the noise had finally dropped below the surface. Her story stayed with me, because in it, I recognized a truth I had avoided, that effort, unchecked, can become a kind of fog. It dulls the senses. It turns every moment into a means to an end. And in that constant forward lean, we miss the vividness of now. When the mirror lake cracks, we start to see through distortion. We misread other people, their silence as rejection, their stillness as laziness. We misread ourselves, interpreting tiredness as weakness, doubt as failure, pause as regression. And we make decisions not from clarity, but from fear. You see, clarity is not a product of control. It is the residue of surrender. It blooms in stillness. It arrives when we are no longer trying to see, but simply witnessing what is already there. This doesn't mean effort is bad. There is beauty in building, in creating, in offering ourselves to the world with care. But when effort becomes a constant state, rather than a chosen gesture, we lose our ability to rest within our own being. There is another way. It begins not with dramatic change, but with small permission. To let one task go unfinished, to let one afternoon pass without a goal, to let one breath land without needing to deepen it. These moments, unremarkable on the surface, are doorways. Through them, the mirror begins to mend. And slowly we remember, we are not here to perform peace. We are here to allow it. And peace, like a wild bird, will not come when chased. But if we sit quietly, if we soften our edges, If we release the need to stir the surface, it may land beside us, unexpected, undeserved, whole, and in its quiet presence, we begin to see again, not through the lens of effort, but through the clarity that comes when we no longer need to chase it. And still, the instinct to push returns like an old friend, persistent, familiar, and hard to deny. Even after we glimpse the mirror, lake in its stillness, even after we understand that peace doesn't arrive through pursuit, we reach again for effort like it's oxygen. Not because we want to disturb the clarity, but because we're afraid of what might surface if the reflection becomes too honest, too quiet, too vast. In this way, effort can become a veil, soft, well-meaning but distorting. We hide behind it, believing we are refining ourselves, perfecting, improving. But beneath that labor often lies a more delicate truth. The self doesn't need to be reworked to be worthy. It simply longs to be witnessed, not worked on. But when you're immersed in striving, this is almost impossible to believe. I remember watching a friend once, an artist, who had become obsessed with his next series of paintings, not for fame or recognition, but because he had convinced himself that the only way to matter was to create something important. He painted obsessively, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, chasing an elusive feeling that never quite landed. The more he worked, the more his lines tightened, the colors dulled, the canvases grew busier but emptier. And then one day, he stopped. He took a train to the coast and sat alone by the ocean for 3 days. No sketchbook, no agenda, just the sound of waves and the slow return of his own breath. When he came back, he didn't paint right away, but he spoke differently, softer, slower. He said something that still echoes. I was trying to prove that I could create clarity, but clarity was already there. I just had to step back far enough to see it. Sometimes we need distance to see the cracks we've created with our own hands. The overthinking, the overdoing, the restless need to fix what was never broken, only misunderstood. And maybe that's what cracks the mirror, lake most of all, not the effort itself, but the belief that effort is always noble, always necessary, always the only way through. We revere effort like a ritual, but a ritual without reverence becomes just another habit. And habits, when left unexamined, can block the very presence they were meant to invite. So how do we return to ease? Not by willing it, not by adding it to the checklist, but by softening. We begin by noticing how much tension we carry even in stillness, the clench in the jaw while meditating, the urge to narrate our quiet walks, the subtle guilt that seeps in during slow days, the way we glance at the clock, not to know the time, but to measure how much of it we've used. Well, that measurement is the crack. But cracks, as Leonard Cohen reminds us, are how the light gets in. What if we stop trying to repair the surface and simply let the cracks widen, not to collapse, but to reveal, to let light seep through, to let reflection be fractured and still truthful, because even broken mirrors reflect something real. There is wisdom in ruin, clarity too. You may find that the more you surrender the chase, the more vividly the world appears. Colors soften and deepen, sounds stretch and echo. Your own thoughts become less like commands and more like passing clouds. And what once seemed urgent begins to blur at the edges, revealing something slower, more ancient, more whole. Stillness doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, and presence doesn't require that you stop moving. It only asks that you stop fleeing. When we cease the endless effort to become, we begin to remember how to be, and from that being, quiet, cracked, uncertain, arises something strangely luminous. Not a polished self, but a true one. Somewhere between pushing and pausing, between precision and presence, there comes a quiet threshold. The moment you begin to notice how long you've been straining to see clearly, and how that very strain has clouded the view. It often reveals itself in subtle ways. A sense that every thought arrives hurried, that even your joy feels effortful, your curiosity tinged with strategy. You catch yourself trying to experience rather than simply experience, watching a sunset but also narrating it, listening to a friend but also wondering how to respond wisely. You reach for the stillness, but your reaching stirs the water again. This is the paradox of clarity. It cannot be achieved through force. Like sleep or love or grace, the more you chase it, the farther it slips. You don't capture it, you surrender to it. And surrender is a kind of forgetting. Forgetting the mental checklist, forgetting the inner critic, forgetting the need to name what you're feeling, forgetting the belief that you must earn peace in order to deserve it. I once met a violinist who, after years of rigorous touring, took a sabbatical, not out of burnout, but curiosity. She told me she wanted to find out what sound was like when she wasn't trying to shape it. Not in a hall, not for applause, not for mastery, just sound, unclaimed. She moved to a small cottage by a river and didn't play for weeks, just listened to the creak of trees, the breath of the wind, her own footsteps on the floor. When she finally picked up the violin again, she said her hands shook, not from rustiness but from reverence, and the sound that came out was softer, not in volume, but in quality, as if the music was no longer trying to be heard, as if it had nothing to prove, only something to reveal. That is the feeling we come close to when the mirror lake stills again, when effort no longer overlays every gesture, when clarity arises not because we've sought it, but because we've stopped interfering with it. This doesn't mean we never move. It doesn't mean we avoid responsibility or abandon craft or detach from care. It simply means we remember that the clearest reflection comes when we've allowed ourselves to be quiet enough, long enough, for the water to settle. And sometimes, that settling happens in ways we don't control, in heartbreak, in waiting, in the between spaces where the world stops asking for our performance and starts whispering toward our essence. Those moments, unremarkable to the outside eye, are sacred because they return us to ourselves without adornment. No roles, no rehearsals, just the simple presence of being alive and not needing to prove anything. The cracks in the mirror, then, aren't signs of failure. They're reminders that clarity isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. And sometimes, the most honest thing we can do is stop. Not just physically, but spiritually. Let the striving rest. Let the mind loosen. Let the silence swell unfilled. Because in that widening stillness, something returns. Not something new, something forgotten. The face beneath the effort. The breath beneath the thought. The world, gleaming as it is, needing nothing from us to be whole. There is a strange thing that happens when you try too hard to be present. You miss it. It's like reaching for your own shadow on a wall. The more intentional your grasp, the more it slips away, and still we try. We meditate with determination. We breathe like we're being graded. We search for the moment instead of falling into it. As if presence were a destination we could arrive at through the correct series of mindful steps. But presence isn't a technique. It's a surrender. And surrender, by its nature, cannot be forced. This is the paradox at the heart of presence. The more we seek it, the more it eludes us. The more we try to feel, the more numb we can become. Because the act of trying implies a gap, a lack, a subtle violence. As if the moment itself is not enough until we've grasped it, named it, folded it into meaning. But some things disappear when held too tightly. Imagine a quiet afternoon, a patch of sunlight warming the floor. You're sitting, doing nothing, not meditating, not reflecting, just sitting. A breeze lifts the curtain. You notice the way the light shifts across the wall, and for a breath, just a breath, you are not thinking about what the moment means. You're not trying to be present, you simply are. Then the thought comes, this is presence, and just like that it's gone. Because now you're in the mind again, observing, labeling, reaching. It's not wrong. It's not a failure. It's just effort. And presence doesn't bloom from effort. It blooms from the pause after effort ends. I once spoke to a gardener who described his favorite part of the day not as planting or pruning, but the stillness just after watering. There's something sacred. He said, in the way the soil darkens, the air softens, and everything waits. It's not busy, but it's alive. That's what presence is like. Not the act of doing, not the work of becoming aware, but the soft echo that arrives when you stop chasing it. But this can be uncomfortable, especially for those of us trained to believe that feeling more, being more present, more alive, should come with visible signs, tears, epiphanies, a sudden swell of joy. And when those signs don't appear, we assume we've failed. We try harder, we reach deeper, we effort our way toward wonder, but the moment doesn't respond to force. It responds to attention without grasping, awareness without demand, stillness that doesn't ask to be useful. There's a line from a Zen poem that says, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. Not because we willed it, but because we allowed space for it. The more we release the need to make something happen, the more we begin to notice what is happening. A conversation that doesn't need an agenda, a walk with no destination, the gentle hum of the fridge late at night, reminding you that the world continues even when you don't perform for it. And maybe this is the deepest gift of presence. Not that it gives us more sensation, more vividness, more meaning, but that it teaches us to stop needing more. That what's already here, its quiet, ordinary simplicity, is enough. But don't confuse that with passivity. Presence is not absence. It's not blankness. It's intimacy with what's right in front of us, with what's within us, with the parts of life we usually move too quickly to feel. When you stop trying to be present, you stop standing outside your own life like a tourist. You step back in, unfiltered, uncoached. You become the breath instead of the observer of it, the sound instead of the listener. The more you let go, the more everything arrives. Vivid, immediate, undeniable. And from that arrival comes a kind of soft astonishment, not the fireworks kind, but the kind that hums beneath the surface of things. The glint on the surface of the mirror, late when the wind calms and the reflection returns. The way the world looks when you're not measuring it, improving it, reaching for it, just letting it meet you. And then you begin to see, truly see, that peace does not come from effort. It comes from remembering you never had to strive for it in the first place. Presence doesn't need to be created. It needs to be allowed. There's a moment, so fleeting it almost always escapes notice, when a thought turns into a grasp. You might be sipping tea, watching the steam rise, and for a breath, there is only this: warmth against your palm, the fragrance curling upward, the light playing in the ceramic's glaze. But then the mind flickers, I should savor this. And just like that, you're no longer in the moment. You're managing it, measuring it, trying to lock it into meaning, trying to feel it better. This is the paradox of presence. It vanishes the moment we try to possess it. Because presence isn't something we do, it's something we remember when we stop trying to make it happen. In our age of mindfulness apps and curated simplicity, presence has become a commodity, a goalpost. But presence, true presence, is not tidy. It's not aesthetic. It's not even necessarily peaceful. It's raw, unyearned, sometimes tender, and always just as it is. But we've been taught to approach it like a project. Another item on the list. Another thing to optimize. We believe we must do more to experience more. But experience isn't waiting on our effort. It's waiting on our availability. The more you try to engineer it, the more it shrinks away. I once read a story about a photographer who traveled for months to capture the perfect image of a rare owl that only emerged at dusk. He camped in the cold, studied flight patterns, positioned his camera for days. But the owl never came. One evening, weary, he gave up. He stopped adjusting the lens. He stopped waiting. He simply sat in the growing dark, his hands resting in his lap. That's when the owl landed, not in front of the lens, but beside him, just out of frame, as if to say, "Come when you stop watching for me." Presence is like that. It doesn't respond to pressure. It arrives when we stop demanding it show up in the way we expect, and in its arrival everything sharpens, but not in a loud or dramatic way. The texture of a shadow becomes visible. A stranger's laughter on the street makes your ribs ache. A memory you haven't touched in years slips in like a whisper and leaves you blinking. These are not grand events, but they are life, unfiltered. It's the act of non-doing, of setting down the impulse to control the moment, that allows the moment to become full. There is a kind of wonder that blooms only when we stop tending to it. It's what the mirror, lake has always shown us, that clarity is not something we manufacture. It is something that emerges when we no longer ripple the surface with our striving. You can sit for hours trying to have a present moment, or you can notice the breeze against your skin, the rise and fall of your breath, the sound of a bird calling and another answering, and for a blink of time, maybe only a second, you are not performing your life. You are simply living it. The richness is already there, the vividness, the sacred rhythm beneath the noise. And if you let yourself release even a little, the tightness in your jaw, the planning in your mind, the need to capture, you'll feel it not as an epiphany, but as a quiet returning, a soft homecoming to the moment before effort entered. The world begins to glow in its ordinariness, not because you tried to see it, but because you finally stopped trying. There's something quiet that happens when you stop looking for life to impress you, not because it stops being beautiful, but because the need for spectacle fades. What remains is gentler, smaller, but somehow more infinite. The clink of a spoon, the shifting light on an aging wall, the sound of your own breath when you're not trying to fix it or deepen it or name it. When we release the idea that presence must feel like something luminous, euphoric, meaningful, we begin to encounter it as it actually is, plain, sacred, and astonishingly neutral. It does not arrive with fireworks. It hums like the low murmur of the earth, steady, ongoing, not waiting for our permission to be real. But we're so conditioned to strive, even in our stillness, to get it right, to feel something profound. And when that profundity doesn't arrive, when the tea tastes like just tea, when the silence doesn't thunder with revelation, we assume we've failed, that we must not be doing nothing well enough, as if peace were another thing to earn, as if the moment were withholding its magic until we prove our worthiness. But the moment is not coy, it's not punishing, it's just not theatrical. Its wonder is in its texture, not its volume. And so presence becomes possible again when we stop insisting that it arrive a certain way, when we stop leaning into it like a question, when we let the world be unimpressive for a while, and trust that even unimpressive things are holy. In the space between trying and not trying, something shifts. You begin to notice things you've walked past 1,000 times. The way the leaves gather in the corner of the stairs, the rhythm of your friend's voice when they're tired, the sudden ache in your chest when you see someone laugh like they mean it. This is the paradox: you feel more not because you tried harder, but because you stopped needing to feel so much at all. You gave the world room to reveal itself without shaping it. And that's when it begins to shimmer, not loudly, not always beautifully, but truly. I remember watching my grandfather nap once, his hands folded over his chest, his breath light and uneven, the window casting soft golden lines across his arm. Nothing happened, but I could have cried from how alive it all was, how tender, how absolute. That moment taught me something no meditation app or philosophy book ever could, that presence isn't a peak. It's the slope. It's the gravel. It's the ordinary thing, held long enough to glow. And when we give up the demand to feel something extraordinary, we start to feel everything again. Not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic moment, no cinematic collapse. Just a series of small silences, moments I once would have called inefficiencies, that began to stretch longer than I could explain. A forgotten appointment, a word I couldn't recall. A morning I stared at my reflection and realized I didn't remember the last time I looked at myself without assessing something. My face had become a checklist, my breath a thing I only noticed when it tightened. But that's the thing about collapse. It often arrives not as a fall, but as a gradual loosening, the scaffolding quietly peeling away while the world continues to applaud your structure. I was the kind of person who moved fast, quick to respond, reliable, achieving, always balancing, always optimizing. I had systems for everything, goals, routines, a calendar so color-coded it resembled a flag. My life was a performance of being fine, and yet, beneath the momentum, something had gone still. Not in the peaceful way, but in the way an engine hums after the car has already been parked and forgotten. I wasn't tired. I was hollow. Still, I kept going. Because when you believe that worth is earned through motion, stopping feels like a kind of disappearance. But the body doesn't lie. It whispers long before it screams. Mine whispered through headaches that made light unbearable, through anxiety that curled my breath into a fist, through a subtle grief I couldn't name, the mourning of a self that never had time to exist. Eventually, I couldn't move without shaking. I couldn't work without weeping. And so, I stopped. I didn't stop like someone making a bold decision. I stopped like someone collapsing into the only space that hadn't asked anything of me. I lay on the floor for hours that first day, not meditating, not journaling, not processing, just not doing. And for a long time, I thought I was failing at recovery because nothing felt clear. There were no breakthroughs, no epiphanies, only exhaustion, thick and shapeless. But in that exhaustion was a kind of honesty I had never known. And slowly, imperceptibly, the edges softened. A breeze came through the window and I felt it. A song I had heard 1,000 times moved something in me that wasn't ambition. I began to cry when I washed the dishes, not from sadness, but because I had finally slowed down enough to feel my hands again. The warm water, the weight of the bowl, the echo of the faucet. These things had waited for me. My whole life had waited for me. It's strange what becomes sacred when you've run out of reasons to be impressive. And stranger still, how rest, real, unglamorous, untidy rest, becomes an act of rebellion. Not rebellion in the loud, declarative way, but rebellion in the sense that it dares to believe you are worthy without proof. That the soul doesn't need permission to pause. For a long time, I resisted calling what I experienced a collapse. It felt too dramatic, too final, but now I see it differently. Collapse was not a failure. It was an invitation, a cracking open. The mirror lake I'd been too busy to notice began to reveal itself again, not with fanfare, but slowly in small reflections. The rhythm of my breath when I stopped counting it, the way a tree shades the ground without asking for thanks, the simple truth that the world continues, beautifully and differently, whether I am productive or not. And in that truth, I found a kind of peace I had never felt while striving, a peace that did not arrive through effort, but through surrender, through stopping, through trusting that what remains after collapse is not emptiness, but spaciousness. What I had called doing nothing was not a void. It was the place where everything true begins. It's a strange thing, how rest, once it truly begins, doesn't ask anything of you. It doesn't care how long you've waited to receive it, or how much you think you need to earn it. It doesn't look for apologies. It just offers its quiet, open arms and waits for you to stop explaining. I didn't know how to accept that at first. After the collapse, even when I had technically stopped, some part of me was still narrating, was still strategizing. I kept asking, is this recovery? Am I doing it right? When will I feel better? But the better never came in the form I expected. It didn't come like clarity. It came like fog, soft, disorienting, and somehow generous. It gave me permission to drift, to lose track, to become unremarkable again. And in that unremarkable space, I began to notice things that ambition had always moved too fast to see, like the way morning light pools on the floor before it climbs the walls, the way birds don't sing in sequence. They interrupt, they improvise, the way breath doesn't need to be deep to be beautiful. Just noticed. There is a kind of sacredness in these fragments. They don't improve your life in any measurable way. They don't build anything, but they stitch you back into the fabric of the present without needing to explain why you were gone. I learned to nap in the middle of the day, not as a hack for productivity, but as an offering to my nervous system. I sat under trees and forgot what time it was. I let dishes pile. I read pages without finishing chapters. I let my life loosen, and though I feared this loosening would lead to unraveling, something else happened. I didn't fall apart. I expanded. The part of me that had clung to effort like a lifeline, that relentless inner worker, that constant fixer, began to soften her grip. She didn't disappear, but she began to rest too. She started to trust that her job was not to keep the world spinning, but to occasionally sit down and let it turn without her. And that trust, that first fragile belief that I could be safe in stillness, changed everything. Not quickly, not neatly, but quietly. I began to feel the difference between collapse and rest. Collapse is the body begging for what the mind refuses to grant. Rest is the body remembering it never had to beg in the first place. Rest, when it finally came, felt like a home I had forgotten the way back to, and the path wasn't paved with goals or insights. It was made of pauses, unreadiness, silence, the unseen labor of letting go, of allowing the mirror, lake to still again, not because I forced it to, but because I finally stepped away from the edge. And in its reflection, I didn't see resolution. I saw belonging. Not the kind I chased, the kind you hustle for, the kind you prove, but the kind that welcomes you precisely because you have nothing left to prove. There is a gentle, almost imperceptible shift that occurs when rest becomes more than an absence of motion, when it reveals itself as a quiet act of defiance against the relentless push of doing. Rest as rebellion is not about grand gestures or dramatic pauses. It's about the subtle refusal to bow to the demand that our worth be measured by our output. In my own collapse, I learned this slowly, almost unwillingly. The world kept whispering, keep going, you're almost there. Just one more task, one more meeting, one more proof that you matter. But my body, that unyielding witness, began to speak in cracks, in tremors, in the soft exhaustion that no caffeine could erase. It wasn't a collapse I chose. It was one I was invited into, whether I liked it or not. At first, rest felt like defeat, like falling behind, like being left out of a race I never wanted to run, but was too afraid to stop. I lay awake for hours, counting the difference between who I was supposed to be and who I had become. A shell made brittle by relentless striving. But then, in the silence that followed, I noticed something unexpected. Rest, even in its quietest form, was an opening. A clearing in the forest where light could finally reach the ground. Not a pause before the next sprint, but a place in itself, fertile, wild, unmeasured. I began to understand that my collapse was not a failure but a threshold. A a fracturing of old patterns that had bound me to a version of myself defined by endless effort. And in that fracturing, the mirror lake of my awareness, so long clouded by tension and expectation, began to clear. The stillness was not empty, it was full of unseen labor, quiet transformations that no one applauded, but that mattered more deeply than any achievement. This rest was a rebellion, not against productivity itself, but against the lie that productivity is the only path to belonging. It was a reclaiming of the truth that I could exist fully, in my fractures and in my stillness, without proving anything. In that reclaimed space, peace found me, not as a prize, but as a companion. Rest, I realized, is not a withdrawal from life. It is an invitation to return to life on its own terms, in its rhythms, its seasons, its unpredictable unfolding. And that invitation remains open, even now when the world calls for motion. To rest is to say softly but firmly, I am here, and I am enough. There is a moment that comes not with fanfare or flashing lights, but with the softest kind of stillness, a silence so profound it almost feels like a breath held between two worlds. This is the first silence, the quiet that arrives when you stop, not just physically but deeply, when the urge to do, to fix, to prove, even just for a moment, slips away, when the hands unclench, the mind lets go of its tightening grip, and the heart stops racing against time. It can be unsettling. The first silence often arrives like a door swinging open to a room you've forgotten existed. Vast, empty, and unshaped, it is unfamiliar territory, a place without agenda, without script. And in that space, something unexpected happens. You discover that silence is not absence, it is presence. Not void, but fertile ground where the unseen begins to stir. I remember a winter evening when I first felt this silence. The world outside was muffled by snow, and inside, the fire's glow traced gentle shadows on the walls. I had ceased moving, not from exhaustion, but from choice. I simply sat, letting the stillness settle over me. At first, my thoughts rushed in, as if startled by the quiet. Old worries, future plans, the endless checklist of what still needed doing. But slowly, they softened, became less urgent, less necessary. And then the silence deepened. It was as if the noise I had always mistaken for life had been peeled away, revealing something beneath. A quiet pulse that neither demanded nor pleaded. A pulse that held me, even as I held nothing. This silence was a threshold, a boundary between the frantic world of effort and the tender realm of ease. What happens when you stop, truly stop, is not that the world stops. It keeps moving, with its sounds and rhythms and urgencies, but you step out of its relentless current. You find a place beside it, where time stretches and softens. This is the paradox of surrender, that in letting go of control, you gain a deeper kind of holding, a gentler belonging. And the mirror, lake of your being, long agitated by waves of doing and undoing, calms. Its surface smooths, reflecting not just the sky, but your own face in unguarded truth. In the first silence, you meet yourself again. Not the self you manufacture for others, not the self tethered to achievement or identity, but the self that simply is, whole, imperfect, unfolding. There is a tenderness here, a kind of sacred humility. You realize that peace is not a prize to win or a task to complete. It is a gift waiting patiently beneath the struggle. The first silence is the invitation, the opening of a door that leads away from noise into stillness, away from striving into grace. It does not promise easy answers or neat resolutions. Instead, it offers space, space to breathe, to wonder, to be. And in that space, the art of doing nothing begins. There is a moment, often so subtle it slips past unnoticed, when the ceaseless river of doing slows. The urgency begins to ebb, the restless mind loosens its grip, and a silence arrives, not as an absence, but as a presence. This is the first silence, a threshold where something both fragile and profound takes root. Stopping is not merely a pause in movement, it is a surrender to the unknown. It is the quiet invitation to meet what has been waiting beneath the noise, the unspoken, the unseen, the still. The first silence asks us not to fill it, but to listen, to witness the spaces between our breaths, the gentle shadows cast by a fading sun, the echo of our own heartbeats unguarded by distraction. I recall a late afternoon spent by a still lake, where the water was so calm it mirrored the sky like a perfect glass. For a long time, I simply sat there, allowing myself to dissolve into the quiet, resisting nothing. At first the mind churned, pushing thoughts like wind stirring ripples across the surface. But slowly, the ripples ceased. The lake calmed, the reflection returned, not a distorted image, but a whole unbroken presence. What happens when you stop is not the cessation of life, but the unveiling of its deeper rhythm. The mirror, lake within you, stirred and clouded by effort, reveals itself again. And in that revelation lies a paradox. The more you stop trying to control the moment, the more vivid and alive it becomes. Presence blooms not through force, but through ease. It is the gentle unfolding of awareness when striving ceases. It invites wonder, the kind that emerges in the spaces where nothing is demanded, where the self can breathe freely. Yet stepping into this silence can be daunting. The first silence is not always serene. It can be filled with uncertainty, with the rawness of unfiltered emotion. It asks us to confront what we often avoid. The shadows, the quiet aches, the still small voices within. But it is precisely this meeting that holds the seed of transformation, the unseen labor of silence, where growth occurs without spectacle, without noise, where peace is not manufactured but allowed. The seasons of the self turn gently in this space, winter yielding to spring, rest giving way to renewal. The rhythm is cyclical, not linear, teaching us that surrender is not defeat, but an essential cadence of life. When you stop, you do not fall into void, but into fullness. The mirror lake reflects not just the world around you, but the truth within, undisturbed, whole, waiting. And so the first silence is both an ending and a beginning, a soft doorway into a life lived not by struggle, but by gentle belonging. That first silence often arrives unbidden, like a pause in a long conversation, a breath held before the next word. It is a stillness not forced, but folded gently into the fabric of your being, revealing a vastness that has been waiting beneath the hum of doing. When you stop, you might expect emptiness, but instead, you find a fullness, a presence more profound because it asks nothing from you. In that stillness, the mirror, lake within you ceases to ripple, and for the first time in a long while, you see yourself and the world reflected without distortion. The surface smooths, and the usual noise, the plans, the worries, the incessant push, gives way to a quiet clarity. It is as if the world exhales, and in that breath, everything becomes more vivid, more alive. I remember sitting alone in a quiet garden one evening, the sun casting long amber shadows over weathered stones and ancient trees. I was not thinking, nor trying to think. I was simply there, suspended between what had been and what might come. The gentle rustling of leaves became a hymn. The fading light was not something to capture or analyze, but to receive. In that silence, I was not waiting for anything. I was already arrived. Yet this arrival can be disorienting. The first silence is a threshold, a place where resistance meets surrender. It is the moment when the self, habituated to constant motion and control, feels exposed, like standing naked before a mirror that reflects not just the surface but the depths beneath. Fear and uncertainty may rise. The mind may rush to fill the void with thought. The body may ache to move. But within this trembling lies the paradox of presence. By releasing effort, by ceasing to chase meaning or accomplishment, you open space for something deeper to unfold. The silence is not a void but a fertile ground where unseen transformations take root. Here, the seasons of the self reveal themselves, not as tasks to be completed, but as rhythms to be felt and honored. Like winter yielding to spring, surrender invites renewal. The first silence is not a tidy resolution. It carries ambiguity and mystery. It invites you into a gentle belonging, not to a fixed identity or achievement, but to the fluidity of being itself. It is the place where peace finds you, not as a prize won through struggle, but as a companion walking alongside you in the soft gravity of presence. To stop is to begin again in a different way. To trust that beneath the fractures of effort lies a wholeness unshaken by the noise. The mirror lake awaits, still, patient, reflecting all that is without judgment or demand. And in that stillness, you find yourself not apart from life but deeply woven into its sacred rhythm. In that first silence, the world seems to pause, not because it has to, but because you have finally allowed it to. It is the quiet before any story begins, the space between breaths where everything is possible and nothing is demanded. The mirror, lake within you, long clouded by restless waves of effort, now lies still, reflecting not just the sky, but your own undisturbed being. This silence is neither empty nor lonely. It is full, rich with unseen labor, where transformation begins without fanfare. Here, the seasons of the self turn in their own time, inviting you into a rhythm not dictated by urgency, but by the natural unfolding of presence. To stop is to open the door to wonder. To surrender is to cradle gentle belonging. And in this sacred space of doing nothing, peace does not chase you, it finds you. There is a rhythm to life that is older than any clock, more faithful than any calendar. It pulses quietly beneath our frantic schedules and endless to-do lists. A rhythm shaped not by human will, but by the seasons themselves. This rhythm reminds us that the self, like the world around us, moves through cycles of growth and rest, emergence and retreat, light and shadow. Trying to control this rhythm is like trying to catch the wind with your hands. We push against the natural ebb and flow, striving to make each moment bloom faster, last longer, or feel more meaningful. Yet, in resisting the seasons of the self, we miss the profound wisdom they carry. That life is not a linear march but a spiral dance, each turn unfolding in its own time. I think of the trees outside my window, their branches bare and vulnerable in the stillness of winter. It would be folly for them to fight the cold or rush to leaf. Instead, they stand patient, their roots working silently beneath the frost, preparing for the unseen labor of spring. When the thaw comes, growth appears effortless, not because the tree hurried, but because it trusted the cycle. Our inner seasons are much the same. There are times when we burst forth with creativity, joy, and connection, our spring and summer, and there are times when we must retreat into quiet, reflection, and restoration, our autumn and winter. Both are necessary, both are sacred, both invite us to surrender the illusion of constant productivity. Yet modern life often denies us this grace. It whispers that rest is failure, retreat is weakness, and stillness is wasted time. We become strangers to our own rhythms, forcing growth when the season calls for patience, or numbing rest when the soul seeks expression. But what if we honored the seasons within us? What if we let life breathe, allowing each phase its own shape and time without judgment or hurry? This is not passivity. It is a deep engagement, an active listening to the currents that carry us. It is recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to yield, to fold into the cycle rather than fight it, to trust that the unseen labor beneath the surface is as vital as the visible bloom. In this surrender, the paradox unfolds. By letting go of control, we gain a fuller presence. We become attuned not only to the world's unfolding, but to our own, a dance of becoming and unbecoming that holds us gently in its flow. The mirror lake within us calms, reflecting the seasons as they are, unforced, unhurried, whole. And in its quiet depths, we find the peace that comes not from achievement, but from belonging, not from doing, but from being. There is a rhythm to life that exists beyond the tick of clocks and the urgency of calendars, a pulse woven into the very fabric of our being. echoing the seasons that dance around us. Like the trees that surrender to winter's quiet, only to burst forth in spring with renewed vigor, ourselves too move through cycles of rest and growth, contraction and expansion. Yet, so often we resist this natural ebb and flow, gripping tightly to control, desperate to manufacture progress, to prove our worth through relentless doing. But the truth that whispers beneath the noise is this: peace is found not in forcing the season to change, but in honoring where we are, in allowing life to breathe and unfold without the pressure of our demands. Imagine a field in late autumn, the golden light soft, the leaves rustling gently as they fall. The earth beneath is not barren, it is resting, gathering strength unseen, preparing for the quiet labor of renewal. In its stillness, there is profound activity, a season of the self that invites us to slow down, to soften, to listen. Our modern world, with its constant push for productivity, often forgets this sacred rhythm. It confuses stillness with stagnation, rest with idleness, and in doing so, it fractures the mirror lake of our inner awareness, stirring ripples of anxiety and discontent. Yet, when we surrender the illusion of control and step into the natural cadence of our own seasons, we begin to feel a gentler belonging, a harmony with the flow of life itself. I think of a friend who, after years of relentless striving, chose to step away, not out of defeat, but from a deep knowing that her spirit needed rest. She spoke of those early days of surrender as confusing and vulnerable, like standing at the edge of a vast, quiet ocean without knowing how to swim. But gradually, she felt the currents beneath her feet, steady and sure, carrying her toward renewal. This is the unseen labor of silence, not a void, but a fertile ground where transformation stirs, quietly, patiently. It is where the self sheds the weight of constant proving and remembers its innate worth simply by being. Here, the paradox of presence reveals itself. By doing less, we experience more. By letting go, we find ourselves held. The seasons of the self teach us that surrender is not defeat, but a vital rhythm, a turning inward that prepares us to bloom again. When we honor these cycles, the mirror lake within us clears, reflecting a deeper clarity, not one manufactured by effort, but one gifted by grace. To let life breathe without control is to trust in the slow unfolding, to rest in the mystery of becoming, and to find peace not as a destination, but as a companion along the way. There is a rhythm deeper than the ticking clock, one that breathes in cycles as old as the earth itself. Like the turning of seasons, spring's tender growth, summer's vibrant bloom, autumn's gentle fading, and winter's quiet rest, our own selves move through phases not meant to be hurried or forced. We live within these seasons, often unaware, pushing against their natural flow in a desperate attempt to control, to accelerate, to prove that we are enough. But what if the true art lies in surrendering to these cycles, to letting life breathe without control, to allowing ourselves to ebb and flow in harmony with the unseen rhythms beneath our striving? In those moments of surrender, we begin to notice the mirror lake within us. It is a stillness often clouded by the ripples of effort, anxiety, and expectation. Yet when we step back, when we release our grip, we allow the surface to settle. Suddenly the world reflects back to us in sharp clarity, unfiltered and whole. We see not only our own reflection, but the intricate dance of light, shadow, and depth beneath. I recall a quiet afternoon spent watching a single tree outside my window. Its branches were bare, the season of winter holding it in a silent embrace. There was no hurry in its limbs, no resistance to the cold. Instead, it stood with quiet grace, preparing beneath the surface for the unseen labor of spring's return. It reminded me that growth often happens in the spaces we cannot see, in the seasons of rest and waiting that nourish what is yet to come. Our culture, with its relentless push for productivity, often obscures this truth. We equate rest with failure and stillness with stagnation. But the seasons of the self teach us otherwise. They invite us to honor the necessary pauses, the times when the soul must retreat to grow again. To let life breathe without control is to trust in the fertile silence between action and rest, the unseen labor where transformation quietly unfolds. It is to recognize that peace emerges not from constant doing, but from the gentle surrender to what is. This surrender is not giving up. It is a deep engagement with the cycles that shape us, a loving acknowledgement that sometimes the most profound work is simply being present in the stillness. As we attune ourselves to these inner seasons, we find a gentle belonging, not to a fixed identity or endless achievement, but to the ebb and flow of life itself. We begin to understand that the art of doing nothing is not absence, but presence in its most vivid, unhurried form. And in this presence, peace finds us. There is a common misconception that silence is empty, that when the noise falls away, we are left with a void, a blank space devoid of meaning or movement. Yet if you look closely, you begin to sense something quite different. Silence is not emptiness, it is a fertile ground, a subtle weaving of unseen labor that holds the threads of transformation long before they take shape in the light. Consider the soil beneath a winter field. To the casual eye, it might seem barren, cold, inert, but beneath the surface, life stirs. Roots push through earth, microbes dance in unseen cycles, and the slow alchemy of renewal begins. This hidden activity is quiet and uncelebrated, yet it is the foundation of every bloom to come. Silence, like that soil, is a mysterious force. When we stop striving, stop pushing against ourselves and the world, we invite a similar unseen labor to unfold within. It is the work of healing, of integration, of subtle shifts that no calendar or checklist can capture. The self, unburdened from the tyranny of constant doing, begins to settle into its own rhythm, allowing space for wounds to close, for clarity to arise, for presence to deepen. This is the paradox of doing nothing. The surface appears still, but beneath, profound change is underway. I think back to a moment in my own life when the silence settled in unexpectedly. After a period of intense striving and exhaustion, I found myself forced to rest. At first it felt like suspension. Time stalled, purpose paused. Yet as days slipped by, I noticed the slow unfolding beneath that stillness. Old worries softened, thoughts cleared. A tenderness emerged toward parts of myself long neglected. It was as if the silence itself was a gardener, tending quietly to the tangled roots of my being, loosening what was tight, nourishing what was fragile. In this unseen labor, the mirror lake within me began to clear. The reflection was no longer fractured by the ripples of effort and anxiety, but grew calm and whole. Presence blossomed, not through action, but through surrender. Yet this kind of labor is often misunderstood. We live in a culture that values visible progress, measurable achievement, and tangible results. Silence offers none of these. It offers instead a mystery, a patient unfolding that asks us to trust without immediate proof. And so we resist it. We fill the silence with distractions, with noise, with busy work, anything to avoid the discomfort of stillness and the vulnerability it brings. But what if we allowed ourselves to lean into that discomfort, to hold space for the unseen labor, knowing that it is as vital as any outward effort? What if peace is not found by adding more, but by embracing the quiet work beneath? In the paradox of presence, the art of doing nothing reveals itself not as laziness or passivity, but as a deep, active engagement with being. It is the gentle letting go that allows life's sacred rhythms to surface and the soul to breathe. And in this surrender, the seasons of the self turn once more, weaving rest into renewal, silence into song, absence into belonging. Nothing is not empty. It is the fertile ground where everything begins. There is a profound misconception nestled deep within our hurried culture, the idea that silence is simply the absence of sound, a hollow void where nothing happens. But silence, in its truest form, is anything but empty. It is a fertile expanse, a hidden workshop where unseen transformations quietly unfold, like the earth resting beneath winter's snow. This silence is active with unseen labor, preparing the soul's renewal beneath the still surface. Imagine the patient labor of a seed beneath the soil. To the casual eye, it seems lifeless, dormant, waiting. Yet beneath the earth, subtle processes are at work, cells dividing, roots stretching, the slow gathering of strength. This hidden life is the foundation for blossoming, the quiet beginning of growth that will eventually break through into vibrant existence. So too is silence the soil of our inner world, where healing and change occur beyond the reach of our conscious effort. When we stop striving, we often mistake the ensuing quiet as emptiness, as stagnation. Yet, what is really happening is a deep and necessary work. The loosening of tension, the softening of boundaries, the subtle reweaving of our being. This unseen labor is not glamorous or immediate. It asks for patience and trust, a willingness to rest in the knot, knowing and to welcome the slow unfolding of presence. I recall a time in my own life when silence pressed in unexpectedly. After a season of relentless doing, of pushing toward goals with fierce determination, my body and mind demanded pause. Initially, that silence felt uncomfortable, even frightening. The urge to fill it was strong, a mind untrained to simply be without constant input. But as the days stretched into quiet, I began to sense the unseen work taking place within me. Old patterns softened, unspoken griefs surfaced and released. A gentle clarity emerged. The mirror, lake within me, long stirred by restless striving, settled. Its surface grew smooth and reflective, revealing a clarity that no amount of action could manufacture. This was the paradox of presence. Stillness was not absence, but the fertile ground where everything true could emerge. Yet, this process is often misunderstood and even feared. Our culture values visible achievements, measurable progress, and tangible outcomes. Silence, with its slow, intangible work, seems passive, unproductive, so we fill it noise, business, distraction, resisting the invitation to rest in the fertile quiet. But what if the real work is happening precisely there, in the spaces where we appear to be doing nothing? What if peace is born not from adding more, but from surrendering to the unseen labor of silence? This is the art of doing nothing, to trust the quiet transformation, to allow the soul's rhythms to unfold without interference, and to find belonging not in our accomplishments, but in the very act of being. Nothing is not empty. It is the sacred ground from which all life grows. Silence is often mistaken for stillness, yet it holds a quiet power far beyond mere absence. It is not empty space, but a fertile ground where transformation quietly takes root. Like the earth beneath a frozen lake, the surface may appear motionless, but beneath, unseen currents move, weaving life into new forms, preparing for emergence. This is the unseen labor of silence, the slow, patient work of becoming that requires no audience and offers no immediate reward. I recall a moment during a period of deep pause in my own life. The world seemed to hush around me, and I found myself surrendered to a silence that felt both vast and intimate. At first, the quiet was unsettling, a reminder of the many things left undone and unspoken. Yet, as I stayed with it, I began to sense subtle shifts beneath the stillness. Old tensions loosened, memories softened, and a gentle clarity began to emerge, not through effort, but through gentle presence. This is the paradox of doing nothing. The surface is calm, but within, the self is quietly rearranging, healing, growing. It is a rhythm that defies the logic of constant productivity, inviting us to trust the invisible processes that shape us. The mirror, lake within us, clears, reflecting not just the outer world but the depths of our being, undisturbed by the ripples of striving. Yet in a culture that prizes visible achievement, this unseen labor is often overlooked or undervalued. Silence can feel like loss, inertia, or failure. We rush to fill it with noise, distraction, or busy work, anything to avoid the vulnerability of stillness, and the mystery of becoming. But what if we could learn to lean into this silence, to honor the quiet, unseen work as sacred and necessary, to recognize that peace often blooms not in the spotlight of action, but in the hidden folds of surrender. The seasons of the self unfold within this space, cyclical and wise. Rest is not absence, but a vital act of presence. Stillness is not stagnation, but the slow turning of life's deepest currents. In the gentle gravity of this surrender, we find a belonging that is neither earned nor forced. It is a homecoming to ourselves, whole, imperfect, and infinitely alive. Nothing is not empty. It is the sacred soil where everything begins anew. This unseen labor of silence invites us to reconsider what it means to rest, to pause, to be still, not as absence but as fertile presence. Imagine the quiet undercurrents of a deep lake, where life moves unseen, where seeds of transformation germinate beneath the surface without hurry or noise. This is the paradox of silence, not empty, but full of unseen work, the slow unfolding of life's most subtle rhythms. There was a moment when I sat alone by such a lake, its waters unruffled and reflecting the vast sky. The stillness seemed to press upon me, heavy with possibility. At first, I feared this quiet, mistaking it for stagnation or void. But as I lingered, I felt the depth beneath the surface, the hidden currents shaping the world unseen. It was a tenderness, an unseen labor that invited patience and surrender. In these depths, the mirror, lake within us clears from the disruptions of striving and anxiety, allowing a truer reflection, not just of the world but of ourselves, whole and unguarded. It is here that the paradox of presence reveals itself most clearly. By doing less, by stopping the incessant push, everything becomes more vivid, more alive. Our culture often overlooks this unseen labor, preferring the visible, the measurable, the immediate. Yet peace is cultivated not in the glare of achievement, but in the quiet places where the soul tends its growth without witness or applause. This is the art of doing nothing, not laziness or passivity, but a sacred engagement with the rhythms that move beneath the surface. The seasons of the self turn gently here, inviting us into a cycle of rest and renewal, contraction and expansion. Each phase is necessary, each pause a space for transformation. When we resist, we stir the waters, clouding our awareness. When we surrender, the mirror lake calms and clarity returns. To embrace this unseen labor is to trust the slow work of becoming, to honor the sacred rhythm of presence unfolding without force. It is a profound belonging to life as it is, imperfect, mysterious, and deeply alive. Nothing is not empty. It is the soil where peace takes root and blossoms. There comes a moment in the quiet unfolding of surrender when the mirror lake returns, its surface unruffled, its depths serene. After the ripples of effort and resistance have softened, the lake reflects the world anew, undisturbed by the currents that once stirred its waters. This return is not merely a vision, it is a revelation. To see the world unstirred is to glimpse existence as it truly is, whole, clear, and suffused with gentle presence. Imagine standing at the edge of such a lake at dusk. The sky's last light caresses the water, painting it with hues of amber and rose. The reflection is perfect, not a distortion, but an exact echo of the heavens and trees, the stillness and motion woven seamlessly together. In this moment, time seems to stretch, and the usual urgency of life dissolves into a profound calm. This mirror lake is more than a metaphor. It is a living image of undisturbed awareness, the self freed from the compulsive push to do, to fix, to prove. When the surface of our being settles, we see clearly not only the world but ourselves, reflected without distortion or judgment. The paradox is exquisite. By doing less, by surrendering control, we engage more deeply with the vividness of life. Yet this return is fragile and must be tended with care. The mirror lake can easily be stirred again by old habits, by the weight of expectations or the subtle pull of anxiety. But when we learn to hold presence lightly, with reverence and patience, the stillness deepens. The clarity it offers is not a destination, but a continual unfolding, a dance between motion and rest, effort and ease. I recall a time when I sat quietly by such a lake after a long season of striving. The water was so still it seemed to hold its breath. In that silence, I noticed the subtle shifts in light and shadow, the delicate flutter of leaves undisturbed by wind. It was a moment of gentle belonging, not to achievement or identity, but to life itself as it breathed and unfolded. The mirror lake reminds us that peace is not found by chasing or controlling, but by resting in the sacred rhythm of being. It teaches that the world, in its vastness and mystery, is always ready to reveal itself when we stop stirring its surface. In this deepening stillness, wonder arises, the wonder that by doing nothing, everything becomes more alive. And as the mirror lake returns, so too does the gentle belonging to a life not forced, but freely lived. There is a stillness that returns like a long-lost friend. The mirror lake, calm and untroubled, reflecting the world with a clarity untouched by the usual disturbances of thought and effort. When the ripples of striving settle, the lake's surface becomes a perfect mirror, not distorting but revealing the delicate interplay of light, shadow, and depth. In this return, we glimpse a world unstirred, where presence is whole and undivided. Imagine standing at the water's edge as the sun dips low, casting a golden glow that ripples softly over stone and leaf. The air holds a quiet reverence, as if the very act of seeing has become a meditation. Here, the ordinary reveals its extraordinary nature, not through grand gestures, but in the gentle unfolding of what already is. This mirror lake within us symbolizes a mind at ease, a consciousness no longer pulled by the compulsive need to fix, prove, or control. It is a space where perception deepens, where the paradox of presence becomes tangible by doing less. By ceasing to stir the waters, we see more clearly, and everything becomes more vivid, more alive. Yet the return of the mirror lake is fragile. Old habits, like sudden gusts of wind, can stir the surface into waves once more. The challenge lies in holding presence lightly, nurturing stillness with patience and compassion. The lake's calm invites us to move beyond resistance into a deeper surrender, a quiet belonging to the flow of life itself. I recall a time when, after long seasons of restless striving, I found myself beside such a lake at dusk. The light softened, and the world seemed to pause with me. In that silence, the constant clamor inside me stilled. The mirror lake returned, and with it, a profound sense of peace, not earned, but given freely by the moment. This stillness does not resolve into tidy conclusions. It lingers as an open space, an invitation to wonder. The world, unstirred, invites us to inhabit our own depths with gentle awe, to embrace the art of doing nothing as the way to see everything. And as the mirror lake returns, so does the gentle belonging to a life lived not in resistance, but in harmonious surrender. As the stillness deepens, the mirror lake returns, serene and untroubled. Its surface, once rippled by the restless winds of effort and expectation, now lies smooth and reflective, holding the world in its unbroken gaze. In this return, we find a rare clarity, a moment when the distractions fade and the world reveals itself in a purity untouched by our usual striving. Picture a quiet pond at dawn, its waters so calm they mirror the sky and trees with exquisite precision. The air is cool and still, carrying a hush that seems to slow time itself. In this gentle suspension, every detail, each leaf, each ripple of light, becomes vivid, more alive than ever before. This is the paradox of presence. By doing less, by surrendering the impulse to fix or control, we see more deeply, and the world's texture unfolds in its full richness. This mirror lake within us is the stillness of awareness, a sanctuary free from the clamor of proving and achieving. It is the space where the self loosens its grip, allowing the sacred rhythm of life to pulse beneath. Yet this calm is delicate, easily stirred by the habitual winds of worry, ambition, or self-judgment. The art lies in learning to rest within this stillness, to hold presence gently and with reverence, nurturing the return of the undisturbed lake. I recall sitting by such a lake after seasons of relentless pushing, a time when the surface of my mind was a restless sea. But as I paused, as the lake settled, I felt a profound shift. The world did not change, but my seeing did. The mirror lake returned, reflecting not just the external landscape, but a deeper truth within, a belonging that transcended effort or outcome. This stillness does not demand perfection or neat answers. It invites us into an open space of wonder, where life unfolds in its own time and rhythm. To witness the world unstirred is to glimpse a peace not manufactured, but naturally revealed. A peace waiting patiently beneath the surface, ready to embrace us when we stop stirring. And in this gentle belonging, the art of doing nothing becomes the most vivid way of being alive. As the mirror lake returns, it carries with it a delicate invitation to see the world as it is, unstirred and whole. This stillness born from surrender reveals a depth that effort can never reach. In this quiet reflection, we find a profound clarity, a gentle unfolding where the busy currents of striving fall away and the essence of presence emerges, luminous and serene. The experience is much like watching twilight settle over a calm lake, where shadows deepen and light softens, blurring the boundaries between sky and water. The mirror reveals not just what lies on the surface, but the unseen depths below, the subtle interplay of light and dark, movement and stillness. Here, the paradox of presence whispers its secret. By doing less, by ceasing to stir the waters, we come to see more vividly, more fully. Yet this return to clarity is tender and must be embraced with patience. The mirror lake is easily disturbed, its surface broken by the habitual waves of doubt, anxiety, and the restless mind. Learning to rest in this quiet space requires a gentle letting go, a trust that the world will continue, that we need not control every ripple to find our way. I remember a moment beside such a lake after a season of relentless motion. The world seemed to pause, and in that stillness, I glimpsed a version of myself unbound by urgency or need to prove. The reflection was clearer than any achievement could offer, a quiet belonging that required nothing but presence. This stillness does not offer tidy answers or swift resolutions. Instead, it opens a space for wonder, a place where life's mysteries unfold in their own time, and peace is found not in doing, but in simply being. And as the mirror lake returns, so too does the invitation to belong gently, to a life lived not in resistance, but in harmonious surrender. In the hush that follows surrender, there is a sound, a subtle, persistent whisper beneath the clamor of thought and striving. It is the sound of what was always there, waiting patiently beneath the surface of our doing. To listen to this quiet voice is to begin a conversation with the deep rhythm of life itself, a dialogue that asks us not to act but to receive, not to solve but to open. Imagine standing beneath a vast sky at twilight, when the world softens into shadow and the first stars appear. In that vastness, the noise of daily life falls away, and what remains is a profound stillness, an invitation to attune to the unspoken, to the unseen music of presence that has always been playing. This is the paradox of listening. By stopping the endless motion, we tune into a richer, more vivid reality. The mirror lake within us holds this sound, the undisturbed awareness that reflects the world without distortion. When we cease stirring its surface with effort and expectation, it reveals the world as it truly is, alive with subtle textures, quiet wonders, and infinite depth. To listen is to remember that peace was never absent. It was simply drowned out by the noise of trying. I recall a moment beside a silent forest stream where the world seemed to hold its breath. As I listened, the rush of water mingled with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. It was not the loudest sound, but the most alive. In that stillness, I felt a gentle belonging, not to any thought or achievement, but to the timeless flow of life that moves beneath all appearances. This act of listening requires patience and surrender, a gentle letting go of control. It is the opening of a space where transformation can quietly unfold, where the unseen labor of silence weaves its magic. In this space, the seasons of the self turn with grace, reminding us that growth and peace follow their own sacred rhythms. Not forced, but received. Listening to what was always there is the heart of the art of doing nothing. It is the doorway to wonder, the path to gentle belonging, and the quiet unfolding of peace that finds us when we stop struggling. In the gentle quiet that follows surrender, a new kind of listening unfolds, a listening not for sound alone, but for the subtle murmurs that have always been there beneath the noise. It is the sound of stillness itself, the unseen pulse of life beating softly in the spaces between moments. To listen deeply is to tune into this silent labor, the fertile ground where transformation quietly takes root, unseen yet profoundly present. Imagine walking through a forest at dusk, where the light fades and shadows lengthen, yet the world hums with an undercurrent of life. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the whisper of wind. Each sound is a thread woven into the tapestry of presence. But beneath these sounds lies a deeper silence, a sacred space where the forest simply is, beyond need or effort. This silence holds the essence of the mirror, lake undisturbed, reflecting all without judgment, a reservoir of peace waiting to be rediscovered. The paradox of presence reveals itself here by doing less. By ceasing the endless striving, we open to a fuller, richer experience of being. The world, rather than slipping away in distraction, becomes more vivid, more alive. This listening calls us to a rhythmic dance with life's seasons. Times of growth and rest, activity and stillness, each as essential as the other. In this unfolding, the self learns to breathe without force, to flow without resistance. I remember a moment when, after a long season of relentless motion, I sat quietly by a stream. The water flowed endlessly, yet the silence between each ripple held a sacredness that words could not capture. In that space, I felt a belonging not earned or achieved, but simply given, an invitation to rest in the unfolding mystery of life itself. Listening to what was always there is not passive or empty. It is an active embrace of the unseen labor that sustains us. It is the quiet work beneath the surface, the patient unfolding of peace when the mind stops stirring the waters. Here, in this deepening stillness, we find a gentle belonging, a homecoming to the essence of who we are beyond effort, beyond doing. There is a profound difference between hearing and truly listening. The former is often a backdrop to our ceaseless doing, a faint hum beneath the rush of tasks and thoughts. But the latter, a deep, attentive listening, is a surrender to the moment, an opening to what has always been present yet unnoticed. This act of listening reveals the quiet architecture of life itself, where silence and sound, presence and absence, dance together in delicate balance. Imagine the soft rustle of wind through autumn leaves, each whisper a secret carried from ancient forests. The sound is familiar, yet only when we slow, only when we still the restless mind, does it bloom into a vivid presence, rich with texture and life. This is the paradox of presence. In the act of doing less, we gain far more, access to the unseen labor of silence, the fertile ground beneath our constant striving. The mirror lake, calm and undisturbed, reflects this truth perfectly. When the surface is still, it captures the world in its full clarity, not just the bright, obvious images, but the subtle shadows, the hidden depths. In this reflection, we recognize a timeless rhythm, the seasons of the self unfolding with effortless grace. We are invited to flow with these seasons, to release the grip of control and embrace the cyclical nature of growth and rest, of becoming and being. I recall a moment in a quiet garden, where the usual noise of my mind slowed and a deeper listening arose. The gentle buzz of bees, the distant murmur of a stream, the faint pulse of my own breath. They wove together into a symphony of presence that transcended words. It was not about achieving peace, but about recognizing it in what was always there, beneath the surface. This listening transforms the experience of stillness from emptiness into fullness, from void into fertile possibility. It teaches us that doing nothing is not passivity, but a vibrant engagement with life's subtle rhythms. Here, in this tender space, peace does not come as a prize, but as a natural unfolding, a quiet belonging that asks only for our attention and our surrender. And in this stillness, the world ceases to be a place we must conquer or control. Instead, it reveals itself as a quiet companion, ever present beneath the surface of our hurried lives. The breath we take, the faint hum of distant life, the gentle settling of shadows as day softens into dusk. All these have been there, waiting patiently for us to stop and truly listen. There is an ancient wisdom held in the mirror, lake stillness, reflecting not just the visible, but the invisible, the unspoken stories, the whispered truths carried by the wind and held in the silence between our thoughts. In this reflection, the paradox of presence unfolds. By doing nothing, we become fully alive. We find that the act of surrender is not a loss, but a rediscovery of richness, of layers beneath the rush, of a depth that no effort could ever summon. The seasons of the self turn quietly here, cycles of growth and rest, unfolding without force, without resistance. When we resist, we stir the water, clouding the clarity of reflection. But when we yield, when we allow life to breathe and flow in its own time, the surface smooths, revealing a world more vivid than we ever imagined. Listening deeply becomes an art, a gentle practice of opening to what was always there. The unseen labor of silence, the fertile soil where peace takes root. It asks us to release the tension of striving, to hold space for the unknown, and to find belonging not in achievement, but in presence itself. Here, in this deepening stillness, we meet the world unstirred, and in that meeting, find the quiet rhythm where peace softly arrives. There is a subtle alchemy that happens when time slows, not the ticking of clocks or the rushing of schedules, but the deep, quiet elongation of moments where presence settles like dew on still leaves. In this gentle suspension, the usual cadence of rushing and grasping softens, and something rare begins to unfold. Time opens. It unfolds like the petals of a delicate flower, revealing a vastness that had been quietly waiting beneath the surface. This opening is not a rupture in the flow, but a widening, a deepening that invites us to step out of the hurried current and into the still pools where life's truest rhythms are reflected. When the relentless push to do and achieve pauses, we begin to perceive the subtle dance of seasons within ourselves. The ebb and flow, the blossoming and quiet retreat that do not ask for our control, only our gentle awareness. It is here in this unfolding stillness that the paradox of presence becomes most vivid. By releasing effort, by embracing the art of doing nothing, we find that everything becomes more alive. Colors seem richer, sounds more resonant, and even the silence hums with unseen life. This is the mirror, lake in its purest form, undisturbed, revealing not just the world, but the hidden depths of our own being. Consider the way a river, slowed by a sudden calm, allows sediments to settle, clarifying its waters. In the same way, when time slows within us, the clutter of distraction sinks to the bottom. Clarity emerges, not through force, but through the unseen labor of silence, an invisible work that shapes transformation beneath the surface. This opening of time is both a gift and a gentle challenge. It calls us to lean into the discomfort of stillness, to surrender our frantic striving, and to trust the natural rhythms that do not adhere to the clock, but to the seasons of the self. And in this trust, a new belonging arises, not to tasks or achievements, but to the timeless pulse of life itself. In slowing down, we find not emptiness, but a fertile expanse where peace grows quietly, invisibly. inviting us to rest in the wonder of simply being. There is a moment, a delicate turning, when time as we know it begins to slow. Not the measured ticking of seconds on a clock, but an internal rhythm that stretches and softens, allowing space to breathe. In this gentle unraveling, the rush and clamor fade, and a quiet threshold appears. It is here, on this edge, that time opens, not like a crack, but like the slow unfurling of a leaf touched by the first light of dawn. This opening is not an escape from reality, but a deeper entrance into it. When the relentless chase to do, fix, and prove dissolves, the present moment blooms with newfound vividness. The world, no longer stirred by our frantic effort, reflects itself in perfect clarity. Like the mirror lake, its surface unruffled, revealing depths that usually lie hidden beneath the swirl. Imagine standing by the water's edge, in the hush of late afternoon, when shadows lengthen and the air itself seems to pause. In this stillness, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. The flutter of a bird's wing, the soft ripple of a breeze, each detail alive with a quiet intensity that can only be felt when time slows. But this slowing is not always gentle. Often, it arrives with resistance, a tension between our desire to hold on and the invitation to release. It asks us to trust the unseen labor beneath the surface, the silent unfolding of transformation that requires no force, only surrender. Here, in this space of letting go, the seasons of the self reveal themselves, the ebb and flow, the blossoming and resting, the natural cycles that cannot be hurried or commanded. And as time opens, it offers a paradox. By doing less, we experience more. Presence deepens, wonder awakens, and a subtle belonging to the quiet pulse of life emerges. In the slowing, there is a profound freedom, a gentle gravity that holds us in the soft embrace of what is, inviting us to rest not in achievement, but in being. There is a curious quiet that settles when the rush recedes, an almost imperceptible shift, where time seems to loosen its grip, slowing to a tender, deliberate pace. It's not measured by clocks or calendars, but by the gentle unfolding of moments that were always there, waiting beneath the surface of our busy minds. In this slowing, the world softens, and the sharp edges of urgency dissolve into a velvety haze of presence. At first, this deceleration can feel unsettling, like the first hesitant steps into a still lake whose depths are unknown. Our instinct urges us to move, to fill the space with purpose, but the invitation is to pause, to become attuned to the quiet rhythm that pulses beneath the apparent stillness. It is here that the paradox begins to whisper. By doing less, we begin to perceive more. The mirror lake returns, its surface undisturbed by the ripples of effort, reflecting a world vivid and alive in its quietude. This is the unseen labor of silence, an active surrender where rest is not absence but a fertile ground. Just as the earth requires seasons of frost to blossom anew, our spirits need these pauses to renew their depth and clarity. Time, once a relentless taskmaster, becomes a patient companion, expanding to hold the rich textures of feeling, thought, and being without pressure or haste. Imagine sitting beneath an ancient tree, its leaves stirred only by the softest breeze. The world hums with life, yet it is a gentle hum, a slow breath, not a frantic pulse. In this moment, time itself seems to pause, opening a space where wonder can seep in, where belonging grows not from achievement, but from the simple act of being present. And so, as time slows and then opens, it reveals the sacred rhythm that was always there, inviting us to drift into the deepening stillness where peace finds us, not by pursuit, but through surrender. There comes a moment in the quiet unraveling of our relentless pace when time itself seems to shift, no longer a sharp, linear march, but a gentle unfolding, slow and expansive, as if the very fabric of hours and minutes has softened beneath a veil of stillness. In this delicate slowing, the world breathes differently. It breathes with us, not against us. This is not the time of frantic ticking clocks or hurried deadlines. Instead, It is the time of deepening shadows stretching across a calm lake. Each second lingering like a whispered secret, each breath a tender echo in the hush. It is as if the pulse of existence has found a rhythm that is neither hurried nor halted, but flows like a meandering river, unforced and free. In this slowing, the self's usual grasp on control loosens, and the paradox of presence emerges. The more we stop trying to hold time captive, the more vividly it reveals itself. The mirror lake returns, its surface unruffled by striving, reflecting a world alive in its quiet detail, where each leaf's tremble, each distant bird's call, is amplified in clarity and wonder. And then, as time opens, like a flower gently unfurling after a long winter, it invites us into a spaciousness where the unseen labor of silence is at work. Here, in this fertile stillness, transformation unfolds without effort. Patterns dissolve, tensions soften, and a subtle alchemy occurs, turning rest into renewal, pause into possibility. This is the sacred rhythm, not imposed or manufactured, but revealed when doing yields to being, when the restless river becomes a mirror lake, deep, clear and still. There is a subtle arrival, barely noticed at first, like the faintest brush of wind through autumn leaves. It is the gentle belonging that blooms when striving ceases, when the relentless pursuit softens into a quiet acceptance, a yielding to the rhythm already there. This is not the clamor of victory or achievement, but the tender embrace of simply being exactly as you are. In this space, the heart discovers an unexpected home, not built on the foundations of accomplishment or approval, but resting in the fertile soil of presence itself. Like a river folding into a still lake, the currents of urgency dissolve and a profound sense of belonging arises, not to the world as it demands you be, but to the world as it is, untouched and whole. The paradox unfolds here by releasing the tight grasp of doing, by stepping away from the ceaseless effort to fix, prove, or push forward. A richer aliveness emerges. The mirror lake returns untroubled, reflecting a world that is more vivid, more real, shimmering with the depth of undisturbed awareness. It is in the absence of striving that everything, each breath, each sensation, each passing moment, becomes astonishingly alive. This gentle belonging is not a destination, nor a prize to be won. It is a subtle invitation, like the soft unfolding of a flower at dawn, coaxing us to relax into the quiet dignity of our own presence. Here, rest is not weakness, but wisdom. Surrender is not defeat, but a quiet revolution, a reclaiming of peace that cannot be taken away, because it has never truly been lost. To live here is to move with the seasons of the self, sometimes vibrant and expansive, sometimes hushed and inward, never forced, always flowing. It is the understanding that life's sacred rhythm cannot be hurried, that true belonging arises not from changing who we are, but from embracing the whole of what we already are. So the soul, once restless and grasping, finds its gentle home in stillness. In this belonging without striving, the paradox resolves, not by overcoming, but by yielding, not by fighting, but by opening, not by doing more, but by simply being. And in that simple being, peace arrives like the soft glow of late afternoon light, tender and sure, inviting us to rest. There is a gentle art in living like the weather, an unforced dance of participation that neither resists nor commands, but rather moves in rhythm with the shifting currents of life. Imagine the sky, vast and unbound, that neither clings to the sun's warmth nor fears the coming rain. It yields and embraces, ever soft, ever present, allowing the elements to flow through and around without struggle or agenda. In this softness lies a profound philosophy, to engage with the world not as a battleground to conquer, but as a vast, breathing landscape to inhabit. The seasons arrive and depart without haste or regret, each moment unfolding in its own time, each feeling, each event, a note in the infinite symphony of existence. There is no need to resist the storm or chase the sun. Peace blooms in the space where we flow gently alongside them, becoming neither the tempest nor the calm, but the sky itself, wide open and alive. Living like weather invites us to soften the edges of our restless striving, to move away from the iron grip of control that often tightens around the heart. It whispers that true participation is not in forcing or fixing, but in the tender willingness to be shaped by life's rhythms, sometimes bending, sometimes stretching, sometimes simply holding still as the silence settles. Consider how the wind does not fight the mountains, but curves around them, how the rain does not argue with the earth, but nourishes it quietly. In this quiet reciprocity, there is no failure or success, no need to prove or perform. Instead, there is a deep belonging to the natural unfolding of things, a trust in the sacred timing of becoming and dissolving. This philosophy is neither resignation nor passivity. It is a vivid presence that paradoxically arises when effort dissolves into ease. It is the mirror lake returning to stillness after the ripples fade, reflecting the world in its pure, unfiltered grace. Here, doing nothing becomes the fullest expression of being, a fertile ground where unseen transformations quietly take root. To live like weather is to learn the subtle art of soft participation, embracing each moment with reverence and fluidity, welcoming the unpredictable dance of change without losing the center of stillness within. It is an invitation to rest in the gentle gravity of presence, where peace is not pursued but received, not manufactured but revealed. And in this revelation, the soul finds its home, not in the ceaseless churn of doing, but in the tender unfolding of simply being, like the sky that holds both storm and sunlight in its boundless embrace. To live like the weather is to embrace a way of being that flows with the rhythms of the world, rather than trying to command or resist them. Imagine the soft swell of clouds moving across the sky, sometimes heavy with rain, sometimes drifting light and ethereal, never forced, never clinging, but always present. This is a philosophy of soft participation, where we are invited to show up fully, yet without the sharp edges of grasping or control. There is a quiet power in this yielding, a surrender that does not mean giving up, but rather a deep trust in the unfolding of life itself. Like the wind that bends the grass without breaking it, living like weather means allowing ourselves to be shaped by circumstances, emotions, and the passage of time, while maintaining the core stillness that holds us steady. It is a dance of engagement that honors both movement and rest, action and pause. Consider the seasons as our teachers, each with its own tempo and mood. Spring bursts forth with urgent energy, summer ripens with fullness, autumn lets go in gentle decay, and winter retreats into quietude. To resist these natural cycles is to invite turmoil, to move with them is to find peace in the inevitability of change. This seasonal wisdom reminds us that our own lives are not meant to be hurried or forced, but to be lived in harmony with the greater pulse of existence. In a world that prizes productivity and achievement, the idea of soft participation may feel like an act of rebellion. Yet it is in this very softness, this gentle yielding, that true strength is discovered. When we stop struggling against the current, when we stop trying to fix, prove, or control, the hidden labor of silence begins to work its quiet alchemy. Our restlessness softens, resistance melts, and surrender opens the door to a deeper belonging, to ourselves, to others, and to the world as it is. Living like weather teaches us that doing nothing is not emptiness, but a fertile space where life's most profound transformations quietly take root. It is here in this tender balance of effort and ease that the art of doing nothing reveals itself, not as passivity, but as a dynamic presence that makes everything more vivid, more alive. In this presence, peace is no longer something to chase, but a gentle arrival, like the soft light of dusk settling over a still lake. And so we learn to move with grace, to participate softly, and to trust in the sacred rhythm that carries us forward. Sometimes swift, sometimes slow, always sure. In this way, peace finds us not through relentless striving, through the gentle art of letting be. There is a peculiar kind of freedom that blossoms when we live like the weather, not fighting, not forcing, but flowing gently with the currents that shape our days. Imagine the sky as a vast, breathing canvas where clouds drift, gather, and dissolve in their own unhurried time. The wind stirs the leaves without demand, rain falls softly to nourish the earth, and sunlight stretches itself lazily over hills and rivers. This is not passive existence. It is soft participation, a dance of presence that neither clings nor resists, but moves in harmony with the world's quiet pulse. To live in this way is to loosen the grip of control, to release the relentless striving that propels so much of modern life. It is to embrace the seasons of the self, recognizing that our rhythms, like the weather, ebb and flow, sometimes radiant with energy, sometimes hushed and still. The gentle yielding found here is not weakness but a subtle strength, a way of belonging to the world without demanding it conform to our desires. Consider the lesson of the willow tree, whose branches bend gracefully under the weight of the storm. It does not break because it knows how to yield. Its flexibility becomes its survival. Similarly, when we stop resisting the natural unfolding of our lives, peace begins to seep in, not as an achievement but as a subtle arrival. Like a soft breeze that moves through a still forest, stirring leaves without shattering branches. This philosophy of soft participation invites us into a sacred paradox. By doing less, by not forcing, we become more fully alive. Presence deepens, and the richness of each moment unfolds with unexpected clarity. The mirror lake returns in this space, a surface undisturbed, reflecting the world in its full, vivid beauty. In letting go, we find belonging, not as something earned, but as a gentle grace that enfolds us, steady and sure. Here, nothing is wasted. The unseen labor of silence, the fertile ground of rest, works quietly beneath the surface, weaving transformation in ways that words cannot capture. The soft participation of living like weather is a tender rebellion against the culture of constant doing. It is an invitation to meet life not with resistance, but with open arms and a quiet heart. And so we learn to move with the rhythms that carry us, sometimes swift, sometimes slow, always with a softness that honors both our fragility and our resilience. In this gentle belonging, peace does not chase us, it finds us, settling like the dusk's embrace, as natural and inevitable as the turning of the seasons. There is a moment, subtle and unspoken, where the journey of striving dissolves, not into an ending, but into space. A vast, quiet expanse that neither demands nor concludes, but simply holds. It is the gentle pause between heartbeats, the breath between words, the stillness that cradles all becoming. Here, peace does not announce itself with fanfare or finality. It arrives softly, like twilight folding into night, neither rushed nor halted, but simply unfolding. This space is neither a finish line nor a destination, but an invitation, a sanctuary where the compulsion to fix, to prove, to accumulate gently loosens. The self, so often caught in the tight weave of effort and expectation, begins to unclench, allowing life to reveal its sacred rhythm. In this surrender, the world expands, and the mirror lake of our awareness becomes unruffled, reflecting not what we demand it to be, but what simply is, whole, vivid, and endlessly mysterious. It is here, in the absence of endings, that the paradox of presence blooms fully. By releasing the grasp of control, by stepping back from the restless pursuit, we discover a belonging that is tender and expansive. Like the river that neither forces its course nor stands still, this belonging is fluid, responsive to the seasons of the self, carrying us gently through cycles of rest and renewal without resistance or regret. In this vast openness, the unseen labor of silence hums quietly beneath the surface. This is the fertile ground where transformation unfolds unseen, where the art of doing nothing becomes a sacred act of becoming. The soul, freed from the noise of striving, begins to listen to the soft murmur of the wind, to the deep echo of stillness, to the timeless pulse of being. And in this listening, wonder awakens, a gentle belonging not just to the self, but to the vast unfolding of all life. So rather than seeking a tidy conclusion or a triumphant closure, we linger here in the spaciousness of not knowing. We invite the mystery to breathe with us, to stretch its quiet wings across the horizon of our awareness. The journey is less about arrival and more about presence, a continuous unfolding without edges, a slow dance with the paradox that by doing less, we are infinitely more. This is the art of doing nothing, the gentle acceptance that peace is not a prize to claim, but a subtle arrival when we stop struggling and allow life to be exactly as it is. It is an open-ended invitation to rest in the stillness that has always been, to belong to the silence that shapes us without demand. And so, with reverence for this unfolding mystery, we step softly into the space. No ending, only the quiet, infinite grace of presence.